Hey, we are starting session 6, and it's closing time. I want to talk about how to end your sermon when preaching to young people, because that is very, very important. It's not just important how you start a sermon, but it's very important on how you end it. I think sometimes we can have a rough start, whether your story didn't connect, whether your joke wasn't funny, whether your transition, didn't make sense. Now you have 5 minutes left, and you're asking yourself, okay, how do I end the service? Simply put, you don't. I don't think the last thing from a service should be more rhetoric from you. Instead, I think it should be response from them. I think the last part of a service when preaching to young people is not necessarily on how we end, but it's more on what they experience at the end. Because if we think that this whole service hinges on the way we preach and the things that we say and the sentences that we put together, then we're maybe subconsciously teaching these young people that the most powerful part about the service is the servant. It's not. We're not the most powerful part of the service at all. The most powerful part of the service is God speaking to them. Now, I know even as I'm talking right now, because this is going to bring up the most important thing that I think is in the service, which is altar time. Altar time. I think every service should have altar time. Every service? Yes, every service. Because the altar is not a charismatic thing. It's not a Pentecostal thing. It's a God thing. God will tell people at times to build an altar. They're passing through the Jordan. He says, hey, when you pass through the Jordan, I want you to build an altar. I want you to commemorate this moment that God was here. And then I want people to be able to come back and look at this moment and to remember God is here. For the people right now and for generations after, let's build an altar, something to encounter God, something to commemorate a moment. Let's build that. That is what I think that we should have when we're communicating to our young people. I think that as you're preaching, the goal is the altar. And I'm not saying you got to lay hands. I'm not saying they got to wriggle, rattle, roll. And I'm not saying they have to fall. But I am saying they need to have a moment with God. I want to read something that I actually wrote down and a story that I wanted to remember. Oh, yeah. I was just speaking somewhere a few weeks ago. And I remember that even when I was preaching, I felt like God was doing something the whole time. I got up to preach. This guy invited me. And as I got up, I just felt the Holy Spirit just doing something, not just in me, but in the room, with the people, with the leaders. And as I was preaching, I was like, okay, the altar response is going to be heavy. I could just feel it. I grew up in it. I grew up in an environment that you can just sense things in the spirit. You can just sense what God is doing. And I just felt as a communicator that God, you want to do something. And so I intentionally was cutting time off my sermon, cutting time off my explanation to give more time to the experience. I think any good preacher that discerns the voice of God should do that. Is it about your explanation or is it about their experience? If it's about your explanation, you'll make sure to say what you want to say. But if it's about their experience, you'll allow God to shut your mouth so he can begin to speak to them and say things to them that sounds way better than whatever you prepared to speak on. I think one of the things that we need to do is create the altar for our church. And I was like, okay, I'm going to end this service and we're going to have some time of worship. So we're going to end this moment and we're going to have some time of altar, And I passed the mic to him. He said, give it up for Tyshone Roland. Take your seats. And I was like, what's going on? The band stopped playing. They put on some Drake in the background. And then we're giving away some giveaways. And it felt so incomplete. And then even for me, I felt like the best part didn't even get experienced. I think sometimes when we're preaching to young people and we're not offering them an altar experience, we may be keeping them from the best part of the service. The best part of the service is not hearing a preacher preach. The best part of the service is allowing God to touch them. I remember when I was 26 years old, I was in Singapore and I was sitting across the man that was celebrating ministry, being in ministry over 52 years. I believe he was 70, 76 or 77. And the discussion at the table was, what makes a perfect youth service? That was the discussion. Everyone was talking. Now, here's the thing. I was in my first year of youth ministry. I was saying nothing. If you are in youth ministry and you've been in it like 2 years and under, I would just tell you, don't say nothing. See 2 moons, 2 church calendars, and then you can start speaking. So I'm at the table. I'm not saying anything. Everyone's saying a perfect service is this. A perfect service is that. Young people need XYZ. Young people need a small group. Young people need, and everyone just sharing something different. I'm looking at this man, and I could tell he's about to say something very wise. And as soon as he started speaking, because everyone in the room honored the heritage at the table, I know that you bought this content just to learn about communication, but I'm just going to take a second to just tell you, always honor those who are at the table. If you have people in your life that are ahead of you, if you have people in your life that have done way more in ministry, it's really good and it's really wise. Even Proverbs says it's wise for you to keep your mouth shut just to appear wise, but it's also wise to give honor to people at the table. So as soon as this guy began to speak, everyone was listening, and he said, a good band with a great service, a good band with a great sermon is a bad service. And we were like, okay. And he said, a bad band with a decent sermon with an encounter with God is a phenomenal sermon. Don't ever abandon the encounter. And then you know what happens when old guys start speaking like that. For the next 50 hours, they just going and you just sitting there and you learning. And that's exactly what happened. He looked at me. He said, never abandon the altar. And you're probably wondering, okay, does this even connect with my sermon? It really, really does, because I'm going to show you 4 things that having an altar consistently in your youth ministry will do for your service, your sermon, and your students. Number 1, it creates expectation for God. When you have an altar encounter every week, it allows your students to just come ready for God to speak to them at the end of the service. Maybe at the end of the service, God is going to pray for one of their friends. Maybe at the end of the service, not God, the pastor is going to pray for one of their friends, or maybe one of the leaders is going to walk up to them and have a time of prayer. But it teaches them to expect something from God. Your young people will learn to expect that God will speak to them. It no longer hinges on your thought, because now they're waiting on his touch. I'm going to say that one more time. It no longer hinges on your thought, because now they will have his touch. It creates expectation with God. So while you're preaching, you're going to feel an expectation. You'll get borrowed expectation. It's not even expectation that you're preaching good. It's expectation that God is going to speak to them. So irregardless of what you say or what you don't say, the expectation they have is for God. And we're teaching our young people to always come to church with expectation that God is going to speak to them individually and right then and there. Number 2, it puts you in your proper place. You cease to be their entertainer. You cease to be their performer, and then you become their pastor. You become the person that pastors them through a sermon and pastor them through a moment. Some of my greatest times of a pastor was not through my prepared speech. It was me pastoring a moment of something I noticed that God was doing at the end of a service. We'll have a moment of altar, about 2, 3, 4 minutes. And I could just see God over there. He's doing something. He's speaking to somebody. He's speaking to that student. They may not be able to understand it. But because I know God, and I know that they may not understand things about God, now I could tell them, hey, in front of everyone, or even right there in front of everyone, hey, this is what God is doing in you. It's God speaking to you. It's not me. I'm just a man. I'm a pastor. I'm just a person, but God is doing something. That last 5 minutes of them just reflecting on God allows them to put you in your proper place. And then you no longer have the pressure to be something. Now you don't have to touch on them. Now you don't have to have this phenomenal word. Now you don't have to be something crazy, because you're just a man and God is going to do what only God can do. Number 3, it ends with reflection on God. It ends with reflection on God. Your word is great, but his voice is better. Your word was phenomenal, but his voice is way more better than yours. And when you have the time to just sit down and reflect on what he just did, it may lead them to a revelation that you didn't even give them. I think sometimes when we're not careful, when we try to preach all these crazy sermons, even in the last service, in the last session, I was talking about revelatory sermons. We try to get all these revelations thinking that the only revelation is going to connect with them are the ones we're going to give them. When you have that moment to allow God to speak to them, they reflect and they may get a revelation and reflection that didn't even come from you. And because it came from God, they're going to be more open to applying it in their life. So when you have an altar ministry, when you have a moment of altar in your services, it just allows your students to reflect God, to reflect on what God said and what God did in that service. And number 4, it helps the word fall on good soil. If you're going to preach something that's hard, whether that's on purity, whether it's on faith, whether it's on sexual identity, whether it's on something that may bring up the past of being raped or being hurt or something of that nature, you want to make sure that that sermon, it does exactly what it was intended to do. Because if the devil can come with confusion to distort what the very thing you prepared to say, it's going to create way more harm than good in their life. And so if you're going to preach on something, I want to give an actual example, like sexual identity. And you're going to talk about how God made male and female, and that's it. Preach that sermon and then just say, hey, we're going to take 5 minutes just to worship God and let that word just rest on us and rest on our spirit, and allow the last thing they think about is not your words about being God made male and female. Allow what you preached, which was God's word, as they sit on it. And as Psalm says, they meditate on it. And God right there can begin to make sure that it's fallen on good ground, that he's doing a work, that he's toiling even right after you taught it. It helps the word. It helps you in so many ways. It strips you from this expectation to be something, because you know at the end of the service, God's going to do something. So I want to encourage each and every youth pastor, youth director, student pastor. I don't know what your title is, but I want to encourage you, if you don't have a component of the altar in your ministry, I want to encourage you to add one, especially after COVID. Just being frank, the fact that we went into a season where we couldn't come together, nor could we go to the altar. I think now that we have our churches open and now that we have our altars open, let's fill them. We didn't have those altars to have that space cleaned. We have those altars so people can have an encounter with God. So I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, figure out ways right now that you can add an altar component to your service. Thank you so much.